Sharon Moore and the Michigan Wolverines somehow, and I mean that when I say that, somehow earn a much needed win over the Michigan State Spartans by a score of 24-17. You know, in rivalry games, weird things often happen, and that was definitely the case in this matchup. Michigan State outgained Michigan 352 total yards to 265, 18 first downs to 17. Michigan State had 37 minutes and 5 seconds of possession, yet they lost. At the end of the first quarter, Michigan State led 7-0, and it could have been a 10-0 lead if not for Jonathan Kim shanking a field goal inside of Michigan's 5-yard line. And at the close to the end of the second quarter, Michigan State was given a 62.9% chance to win. That totally collapsed, and by the middle of the third quarter, it was down to Michigan 84.4% chance to win. So a lot of swinging back and forth in this game. In the fourth quarter, it looked like maybe Michigan could make it ugly and run up the score, but Michigan State marched back. They never quit. They never gave up. The effort was there. It was, and Michigan State could have won this game, and I still believe after this matchup that Michigan State at least has the higher ceiling because of their coaching staff and because of what they have at quarterback and wide receiver. So their offense is actually balanced. But Michigan won this game. Michigan had one of their better coaching performances of the season. It was intense. It was competitive. As for the fight at the end, I'm just going to brush that aside. Shouldn't have happened. And I think that Michigan and Michigan State need to take responsibility for what happened there. To what degree? Well, I don't know. Maybe someone is more at fault than someone else. But I want to talk about the football. I don't want to talk about the fight. So let's do that today here. And before I dive deep into this, I just ask you to do a few things for me that are all free and easy. If you could subscribe to the channel, I'd appreciate that a lot. We just hit 20,000 subscribers. And also, if you could like the video and hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when we release new content here and give us a jolt in the algorithm, I'd appreciate that too. And share this video around to other college football fans. Comment your reaction to this game down below. And join our Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment if you want to talk about college football 24/7 with myself when I have the time and also other members of our community. Again, we just hit 20,000 subscribers, and College Football with Sam prides itself on being the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube. And with your help, I think we can become the best college football channel on YouTube. And you can do that by liking, sharing, subscribing, hitting the bell, commenting, joining the Discord server, and watching the video all the way through. All of those things are free, and they all help you out. They also help us out. We'll be doing a giveaway, by the way, now that we've hit 20,000 subscribers, and there's another one in the works for when we reach 1,000 likes on one of our videos. So stay tuned for all of those things, and if you want to support the channel monetarily, you can purchase a membership on my Patreon page or purchase merchandise on my merchandise store, and the links to both of those sites are in the description and also down below in the pinned comment. Same with where the Discord link is and also the link to my Twitter account. So without further ado, let's talk about the battle for the Paul Bunyan Trophy in a game that was the B-list game for my primetime slate. I paid the closest attention to Penn State, Wisconsin, but believe me, my eyes were glued to this game as well. Back and forth between those two games and the homework assignment that I thankfully turned in before midnight when it was due. As for both of these teams, this is an example of a game where if I give you some basic statistics entering this game, you probably would have incorrectly chosen the winner. An example here is Michigan State. They averaged 5.3 yards per play. And if I told you that they averaged 5.3 yards per play against this Michigan defense, and I also told you that they put up 352 total yards to Michigan's 265, you probably tell me right there, well, Michigan State wins. And then I tell you that Michigan State ran for 163 yards. Michigan was held to 119. MSU averaged 3.9 yards per carry and had a touchdown. Michigan only averaged 3.8 yards per carry and had a touchdown. You're probably a little bit more confident that Michigan State wins, aren't you? But that's not what happened. It's not what happened at all, because Michigan also averaged 5.3 yards per play. And Michigan had a 0.226 points per play margin because they scored more points, number one, and they only had 51 total plays. Meanwhile, Michigan State had 65. So Michigan State had 14 more plays. They had a 37-minute time of possession total. And compare that to Michigan's, 22 minutes. They had basically a 15-minute, 14-minute, more than a 10-minute possession advantage. And Michigan still scored more points. That right there is efficiency. That's better special teams to produce more short fields. Michigan did a better job of returning punts and recovering that onside kick attempt, which I watched that live and I thought, what are you doing, Jonathan Smith? You don't need to do that. Just kick it deep. Force Michigan to drive the entire field, because in all likelihood, they can't do it. They just can't. They haven't been able to do that all season long. Drive the whole field and punch it in outside of maybe a few fluke drives. And it's also the fact that, well, Michigan, when they got into the red zone, when they got into Michigan State territory, they often did something with it. They scored. They didn't have a failed fourth down. They didn't miss an easy field goal that should be makeable. They ultimately made less mistakes. And that's why, despite the fact that a lot of basic statistics would point Michigan State's way, because of the things that are random, like turnovers or missed field goals, things that power ratings often have a harder time accounting for in these matchups, Michigan won those. They won the things that are harder to predict. They had the home field advantage. They had energy. They had juice. They matched Michigan State's effort. And in the second half, they more than matched Michigan State's physicality, where in the beginning of the game, Michigan State was dominating. They were owning Michigan at the start of the game. And at the end of the day, well, Michigan fought back and Michigan won. And they deserved the win. And I say that because I think that if this game happened maybe a few weeks from now, or if it happened again today, or if it happened in a neutral field or in Spartan Stadium, I don't know if Michigan wins. I don't, because this game clearly shows that Michigan still has some issues. They're in all likelihood not going to beat Oregon. They're not going to beat Ohio State. They're not going to beat Indiana. Northwestern could even be a challenging game for the Wolverines. But let's dive into this some more. And you look at Michigan not having a turnover at all. On third and fourth down, they were 7 of 12. Michigan State, meanwhile, was 9 of 17. Michigan had no penalties. None the whole game. That's a big deal against a Michigan State team that has struggled with penalties all season long. And they only had 6 penalties for 35 yards. Like, Michigan State had a disciplined game relative to penalties compared to their average. But Michigan had no penalties. They had no turnovers. Michigan State had a turnover on downs plus an actual, turnover in their own territory, that fumble, and they also had a missed field goal. So you factor in turnover on downs, actual turnovers, missed field goals. Michigan State really had 3 turnovers. Michigan had none. They just had, more punts. They had 5 punts to Michigan State's 3. Ryan Eckley more than outclassed Tommy Doman. Tommy Doman had an average of 36.6 yards per punt. Eckley had an average of 51.7 yards per punt. But Michigan still won the field position battle, in part because of turnovers and also special teams. Michigan returned 2 of Michigan State's punts for an average of 11 yards per return. Michigan State, meanwhile, had no punt returns, and their only kickoff return was from Alante Brown for 0 yards. So Michigan won the special teams battle. They ultimately won, I would say, the battle on... They won the battle on defense, too, because Michigan State's offense is much better than Michigan's offense when you look at how they perform at their peak. And Michigan State performed closer to their peak than they have in the past on offense. Like, again, Childs didn't throw a pick. He had 1 bad fumble, yes, but the offensive line was doing well against a Michigan defensive line that has NFL-level talent at basically every position. Nate Carter was a beast in this game, and Michigan State's receivers were active too. But Michigan State still lost, and I want to ask the question, how how did Michigan State lose to Michigan? Because there's a reason why I picked Michigan State to win this game. I'm a Michigan fan, by the way, but I'm objective. I can see things that are coming. And while I have misses, as we all do, there are also things that I get right that others just completely flail on, completely miss on. This was one of my misses here. I don't understand how Michigan State lost this game. They shouldn't have lost this game. They shouldn't have. Historically, if you look at this rivalry and you put potato sacks on both of these teams, the historian would tell you that Michigan State was Michigan and Michigan was Michigan State, if you catch what I'm saying. Where, well, Michigan historically, they have the higher upside. They have a lot of the momentum behind them, typically entering these games. And they always start out fast. They always bring a lot of juice and a lot of energy. But in the long term, Michigan State's more disciplined. They shoot themselves in the foot less. They're more efficient with their talent. And they outlast and eventually mentally break the Wolverines. The opposite happened in this game. The total opposite happened. And need I remind you, Michigan tried to choke the game away at the end, and Michigan State couldn't take advantage of it. So I asked the question again, and please answer in the comments below. How did Michigan State lose this game? Why did they lose this game? Were they looking ahead to Indiana? Because I could totally see that happening. The rivalry is important. Yes, it's absolutely important. I think it's one of the best rivalries in college football. And also at the same time, Indiana's coming to your place. They're likely going to be undefeated. I can see thinking that, okay, this season, this Indiana win matters almost more. Also, Indiana's a rival with Michigan State. A lot of people forget that. I don't think that's exactly a good explanation, though, because I think that there are enough Michigan State players who understand the rivalry, and Michigan is Michigan State's biggest rival. They're an in-state rival. And while a lot of Michigan fans will say that Michigan State isn't Michigan's biggest rival, and from a Michigan fan standpoint, I can say that because I'm a Michigan fan, I agree, because I think Ohio State's Michigan's biggest rival. Michigan State is still a pretty big rival for Michigan. It is one of the more intense rivalries of the sport. Don't believe me? Look on Twitter. Both of these teams are awful. They are gutter trash. They would lose by like a combined 100 points to Oregon. They would. And yet, they treated this game like a Super Bowl. Both of them did. It's why Michigan State fans are distraught about this game, devastated. It's why Michigan fans are super excited, and some may even think in a delusional way that the season is saved, which it isn't, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I don't know. The only thing I can think of is that Michigan State just isn't there yet with players, and they also had some coaching lapses at the same time. And again, maybe they overlooked Michigan for Indiana, but I don't know. But they put up 352 total yards. They dominated the time of possession battle. They controlled the game. They had more rushing yards, averaged more yards per carry, and they had more yards per punt. So they should have performed better on special teams. They should have performed better on offense, and they should have performed better on defense. But despite all those things, they didn't. The only area where they may have been better was the offensive side of the ball, and Michigan was pretty effective there, given what we've seen from them over the past few weeks in particular, and also the entire season. Something I want to focus on before we talk about Michigan is the fact that Michigan State's not a complete football team. When you put up 146, or when you allow 146 opponent passing yards, when you allow 7.3 yards per attempt from your opponent, when you allow 3 total touchdowns, when you're only 1 of 2 on 4th down, and you miss a field goal. So you lose the game with those numbers allowed against an opponent who hasn't put up anything close to that all season long. Like 146 passing yards for 7.3 yards per attempt is good relative to this Michigan team, because this Michigan passing offense is horrific. When you allow Michigan to score 3 touchdowns, which they didn't against Washington, they didn't against Illinois, they struggled mightily to do so against Minnesota. They struggled to do so against USC. In fact, against USC, they only scored 3 offensive touchdowns. Same against Michigan State. They didn't do it against Texas. They didn't do it against Fresno State because they only scored 2 offensive touchdowns there. And they struggled to do it against Arkansas State. They did. So, all that to say, this is not a complete football team. When you lose putting up these numbers, whether they're positive or whether they're negative, and you're not disciplined, you're failing on 4th down at times, you're having to run the ball on 3rd and long because that's your best chance at success against a poorly coached Michigan defense that is talented but very poorly coached. You're not a complete football team. And Michigan State's not a complete football team. They're not there yet. They aren't. They have Aiden Childs at quarterback, who's been very inconsistent all season long. Their best wide receiver, his name is Nick Marsh. Nick Marsh had the only receiving touchdown of the game, the only passing touchdown. He's a freshman. He's young. He has growth to do. And Nate Carter led the team in receiving yards, 2 receptions for 56 yards and a long of 30. They have some good receivers. They have some good offensive linemen like Tanner Miller and Luke Newman on the interior who are awesome. Nate Carter's a beast, 19 carries, 118 yards, 6.2 yards per carry and a touchdown. Defensively, Michigan State has Maverick Hansen, Jalen Thompson. They have Daquan Deuce. They have Jordan Turner, who sadly got a targeting call on him and will be suspended also for the first half of the Indiana game. And they have Malik Spencer and Cal Halliday and Wayne Matthews III and Chris Bogle and Jordan Hall. They have some good players, but there are also some gaping holes on this team and a severe lack of depth and also a lack of discipline and a lack of fundamentals. There's a very high ceiling of this team and a very low floor. And the Ohio State game is a perfect example of that, where if everything went Michigan State's way against Ohio State in that game, it would have been tied at halftime. It would have been a competitive game. But Ohio State, they were disciplined that game. They had the fundamentals down. They executed at a high level, and Michigan State constantly shot themselves in the foot and therefore suffered a blowout loss. This is not a complete football team, and consequentially, you have to give Jonathan Smith and his staff time. And I think that this staff is elite. I do. And yet in a game like this, I can also say it felt like they got in their own heads a bit. It felt like that. It felt like for much of the game they struggled, and somewhat understandably so, to process that Michigan was passing the football downfield successfully. When you're allowing Davis Warren and Peyton O'Leary and Kendrick Bell to slowly carve up your secondary, you have problems. And I thought Davis Warren played exceptionally well. If that Davis Warren showed up against Fresno State and Arkansas State, Michigan wins in more convincing fashion. If that Davis Warren showed up earlier in the year, Texas is still an embarrassing loss, but not quite as embarrassing. It's probably a game for maybe 3 quarters instead of 1.5. And he's not benched against USC. Michigan probably still wins that game. He'd be Michigan's starting quarterback. He had his best game of his Michigan career, and good for him. I'm not dismissing him. What I'm saying, though, is that, circle back to the point I last made, this is not a complete football team. The damage that Mel Tucker and Scotty Hazelton did to the whole team, particularly the secondary, is very, and I mean very, evident by how this game played out. And it felt like they got in their own heads a bit, and they got stubborn. And outside of the early scripted drives, they faltered and they crumbled. That's kind of what it felt like. You know, that first quarter, the scripted drives, you come out, run the football. It seems like Michigan State knew they could run the ball in Michigan, which is very smart, very tactical, because Michigan's defense has a lot of talent up front, but their coaching sucks. It just does. And their linebackers aren't good either, so the gap integrity isn't the same. Consequentially, if you're able to block Michigan's defensive linemen, you're going to get yards because the linebackers are not going to compensate or help the D-line. They're not. Ernest Hausman, Jayshon Barnham are a massive step down from Junior Colson and Michael Barrett. Massive. It was a smart, wonderful game plan. But Michigan, even with some of the questions they have on their staff, they adapted. And it didn't feel like Michigan State could adapt outside of their game script. Didn't feel like that. I don't know exactly why that is. I still think this staff is elite. It was clear watching this game that a lot of Michigan's talent was compensating for the coaching difference, that Michigan roster-wise really is that much better than Michigan State at every position except for quarterback and wide receiver. Like, it's evident. Michigan's offensive line, Michigan State was stacking the box constantly, much more than Michigan was. They still averaged similar yards per carry numbers. You look at Michigan's passing attack, Colston Loveland was just awesome throughout the game. Defensively, it was clear that Michigan was bigger and faster on the defensive side of the ball than Michigan State was, but the play calls were just that much worse. Michigan's talent really did compensate for the coaching difference in this game, and that's a credit to Michigan State and Michigan at the same time, because you'd rather have good coaching than good talent, because in the long term that's going to help. But it's also a credit to Michigan to where they coached just enough of a good game, and they utilized their talent in a variety of ways. Like, they properly used Orji, for example, for the first time, I think, all season long, to where they were able to beat a team that was more balanced, that was better built for success, that had a higher ceiling because of their quarterback and wide receiver play, and also that had a better staff, and they earned a very key and important win. This game did not change my thoughts on Jonathan Smith more than maybe a millimeter or a few grains of sand. It just didn't. It didn't. Michigan State had not much to lose, and they only were going to gain in this game. They weren't going to lose anything even if they lost, because Michigan was a favorite. No one thought in the preseason that Michigan State would beat Michigan, and they're still on track to going bowling. And this is year one of an ugly rebuild because Mel Tucker left the cupboard bare. So those are just my thoughts on Michigan State. If you agree or disagree with me or not, it's okay. Comment down below. My thoughts on Michigan are this. Much needed win for the program, especially if you have faith in the current program. If you're like me, taking off my analyst glasses and putting on my Michigan glasses for a few seconds, I need to see more. And I think Michigan fans should want to see more before saying this is a much needed win for Brycen Moore and it was a good win, because Michigan State is not good. They're not. It's a rivalry game. I don't want to downplay that, and a rivalry win is important. But if Michigan loses out and they go 5-7, who cares about this game outside of a point of pride? You basically pulled a 2020 LSU. Like, at that point, you know your coaching staff is not that good, and there needs to be wholesale changes. The reason why this is a big win is because if Michigan can beat Northwestern to go 6-6 and then upset one of Indiana, Ohio State, or Oregon, which I doubt it, but it's possible. We've seen crazier things in college football this year. Then you begin to think maybe Moore's figuring this out a bit. Maybe he's getting his feet set. And depending on the coaching staff changes that are made, there can be some momentum entering 2025. I mean, Michigan's recruiting at a very high level. A lot of recruits, a lot of highly touted recruits were at this game yesterday. And Michigan won. The fan base showed out. They were committed. The fan base, by the way, for the entire year has been very good at trying their best to generate home field advantage. Very good, especially for a stadium that is not designed to build noise. I think at some point, again, putting back on my Michigan glasses, Michigan at some point should build a double-decker stadium. They should make it like 125, 150,000 capacity. It would be filled, believe me, and make it trap noise. Best home field environment in college football. Just do it. I know they have the money. They have the resources. But anyway, to not get too distracted, this win was needed over Michigan State for Brycen Moore to get closer to securing his job. I think he needs to go bowling for him to not be on the chopping block after this year. But Northwestern, Michigan should beat that team by double digits. And against Indiana, Oregon, and Ohio State, all of those are likely going to be losses, but Michigan has enough talent to where if they coach a game like they did against USC and maybe Oregon, Indiana, not Ohio State, but if Oregon or Indiana are sleepy or Ohio State's overly emotional and keeps shooting themselves in the foot, like let's say they did in 2022, for example, and Michigan pulls off one of those wins, then Moore probably has his job secured. It's just, it's one of those wins that Michigan needed to win because they're expected to win. And they finally did that after losing to Illinois and Washington when Michigan shouldn't have lost those games. So it doesn't fix the season, but it's not like Michigan is continuing to exponentially get worse. They finally earned a win. Michigan's passing offense came alive for the first time this year. They were 14 of 20 for 146 yards, averaged 7.3 yards per attempt in this game. They had 2 passing touchdowns, one by Donovan Edwards to Colston Loveland on a beautifully designed trick play. They averaged 10.4 yards per completion, and Michigan allowed no sacks. The pocket was pretty clean for the whole game. The run blocking, there was a lot to be desired from that, but Michigan State was also stacking the box a ton. So it's a little bit of both. Michigan needs better offensive line play, but also opponents know that Michigan's biggest strength is running the football, and they are going to want to stop that as much as possible because they don't think that Michigan can pass the ball. And in reality, even though the passing offense came alive, they probably still can't. Against Oregon, well, that'll be a massive test because Oregon is much better than Michigan State. But to continue talking about this game here, their passing offense came alive. It was the reason why Michigan won this game because the rushing offense was limited. Michigan's defense, it's not like they generated a pick six or 2 pick sixes or only allowed 1 scoring drive. They allowed Michigan State to get in their territory multiple times. It was Michigan's passing offense and the creativity behind it that enabled Michigan to win this game here. And finally for Michigan, they made little to no critical mistakes. And they had a good coach game. They had a well-coached game. And that's why they won, ultimately. Michigan State had a turnover. And then they had a turnover on downs and a missed field goal. Really, 3 opportunities that gave points to Michigan or that cost Michigan State points and took them off the board. Michigan had no moments like that outside of the missed PAT. That's it. That was 1 point. 1 point lost. And Michigan made up for that with the 2-point conversion, which was a nice throw by Davis Warren, who's making good throws all day long. I don't think he had a single pass outside of maybe 1 that was turnover worthy. Very good game, and he's my MVP for the game, and we'll talk about that in a few seconds. But Michigan was also 7 of 12 on 3rd down, 1 of 1 on their field goals. They only allowed 4 tackles for loss as well. The rushing offense, I know, was not awesome. The passing offense was just good for the day. But Michigan's offensive line didn't allow a single sack, and they only allowed 4 tackles for loss from a Michigan State defense that has talent on the front and that was sending pressure and blitzes all day and stacking the box. Just a sound performance from the Michigan Wolverines, which is something that, shockingly so, especially if I would have told you last season, something that we haven't seen all season long. And it came up in this game. So, good win for Michigan, and my MVP of the game is quarterback Davis Warren, 13 of 19 for 123 yards. He completed 68.4% of his throws, 1 touchdown, a 140.2 passer rating, and he had an 83.3 QBR. Just an overall really good game, good performance by him. Hopefully that boosts his confidence, and it would be an awesome story if he continued this type of success throughout the season. We'll have to see. He clearly played with the same talent and ceiling that he showcased in the first 3 games, but he did a very good job of limiting the turnovers and making good decisions. He didn't make any dumb decisions in this game. So Davis Warren was the MVP of the game. The biggest reason why Michigan beat Michigan State was the walk-on quarterback, Davis Warren. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts on this video and this matchup down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Counterlulu OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, Tyler Nye for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, Will Loftus for being All-Conference members. Have a great day, everyone, and make sure to check out my Patreon page, merchandise store, and Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Go green, everyone, and go blue. See you soon.